The film begins in a small West Texas town during the early hours of the morning. In front of the Texas Midland Bank, a female employee is suddenly confronted by two armed men in masks and plain clothing. They shove her inside and demand she opens the cash drawers. She reveals there's no money inside and mocks them, suggesting they're inexperienced at robbing banks and that leaving now would only make them look foolish. Angered by her remarks, the robbers shove her to the ground near the counter. She informs them that the money won't be accessible until the bank manager arrives at 8:30 a.m. When the manager finally arrives, he is met with a gun to his face, and one of the robbers strikes him. The two men flee the scene in a car. These men are brothers. Tanner Howard, the older one, recently released from prison and known for his criminal history, and Toby Howard, the younger one with no criminal record, who scolds Tanner for hitting the manager. They head to another small town to rob a different Texas Midland branch. Inside, a teller is examining old coins brought by an elderly man who claims he found them in his barn. She suggests some might be valuable when the brothers enter the bank. Tanner instructs the teller to open the cash drawer, only taking small bills and leaving behind any bundles or large denominations. Meanwhile, Toby asks an old man if he is armed, and the man admits he is carrying a pistol. Toby takes the gun from him and places it on the counter. The old man, confused, asks if they are robbing him, but the brothers clarify that they are only robbing the bank. As they leave, the old man retrieves his gun and fires at them. Toby insists they stick to his plan to avoid such incidents in the future. Back at their ranch, the brothers drive their getaway car into a large hole and bury it using a backhoe. The case is assigned to Texas Ranger Marcus Hamilton and his partner Alberto Parker. Marcus is nearing mandatory retirement and sees this case as a way to delay it. Alberto, who is younger and of mixed Mexican and Native American heritage, often exchanges banter with Marcus teasing him about his heritage and Alberto retorting about Marcus's age. The FBI is not involved since the amount stolen was only $7,000, leaving the investigation to the Texas Rangers. At the ranch, Tanner remarks on its dilapidated state. Toby explains he spent the last few months caring for their sick mother, who recently passed away. Tanner, regretful for not being around, sees the hospital bed and old prescription medications in her room. He admits he would have helped if asked, but instead was roped into robbing banks. When Tanner inquires about a will, Toby reveals the ranch is his until Friday when the bank will foreclose on it. Tanner, reflecting on their mother's disdain for him, hints he might have killed their father. Marcus and Alberto visit the first bank and find the security cameras non-functional due to an upgrade. Marcus doesn't get a detailed description of the robbers, but notes they were careful, likely not drug users. Meanwhile, the brothers are in another town, eating at a diner. Tanner asks about Toby's children and learns they are unaware of their grandmother's death, as Toby has had limited contact with them. Tanner urges Toby to visit his kids the next day. Tanner notices another bank across the street from the diner. This one isn't a Texas Midland bank, and excuses himself, leaving Toby to settle the bill. While waiting, Toby strikes up a conversation with the waitress, revealing he used to work in natural gas drilling before being laid off. The waitress shows interest, hinting they could use a cook in the diner after a crash is heard from the kitchen. Toby, feeling generous, leaves all his money for her as a tip. As he exits, Tanner emerges from the bank across the street, having robbed it. Toby is furious since this complicates their plan and the bank wasn't a Texas Midland branch, but Tanner is indifferent. Marcus and Alberto are en route back to their office when they receive news about Tanner's latest heist. They turn back, with Alberto making jibes about retirement and Marcus responding with racial slurs. On their way to the bank, they encounter a prairie fire and ranchers moving cattle across the road to escape the flames. One rancher, despairing, suggests letting the fire consume him and his herd to end his suffering. Marcus comments that people out here are often left to fend for themselves, highlighting the pervasive poverty. Meanwhile, Toby and Tanner head to Tanner's trailer, which he occupies in exchange for shooting coyotes. Tanner grabs his rifles, which Toby reluctantly allows in his car. They cross into Oklahoma, stopping at a gas station where Toby goes inside to buy snacks. A car with loud music pulls up, and the driver, eyeing Tanner, starts taunting him and pulls out a pistol. Tanner coolly warns, "Just think there are 10 of me," as Toby returns and promptly beats the driver. Confronting the passenger, who acknowledges the driver deserved it, Tanner then teases Toby for getting the wrong drink. Marcus interviews the bank teller from the recent robbery, learning there was only one robber who headed to the getaway car. He then visits the diner to gather more descriptions from the patrons and waitresses. He asks the waitress for the $200 tip Toby left as evidence, but she insists he returns with a warrant, needing the money to keep her home for her kids. Marcus instructs Alberto to book them a hotel room, suspecting the robbers will strike again in the vicinity. Meanwhile, Toby and Tanner head to an Indian casino, where the influx of cash goes unnoticed. Tanner takes a few chips to play poker, while Toby sits at the bar with a substantial pile of chips. Tanner plays well, but ends up exchanging heated words with an Indian man, learning that Comanche means enemy of all. A prostitute approaches Toby at the bar, but Tanner quickly sends her away. They cash out their winnings, with Toby converting most of it into a check made out to Texas Midland Bank. The brothers check into a hotel where Tanner flirts with the receptionist and later has sex with her, much to Toby's discomfort as he tries to ignore the noises from the next bed. In their hotel room, Marcus and Alberto watch TV, with Marcus continuing to insult Alberto. Alberto is visibly hurt, and later that night, Marcus wakes up, troubled by his impending retirement. Alberto tries to comfort him, but Marcus responds with more insults. The next day, the brothers purchase a used pickup truck for their next heist. Toby visits his ex-wife and sons, telling his eldest that the ranch will be held in a trust for him and his uncle, and that there is oil on the land. He warns his son that he will hear stories about him and Tanner and to believe them, but not to emulate their behavior. Marcus and Alberto stake out another Texas Midland bank in a small town, waiting in a diner across the street. The waitress practically dictates their order. The brothers meet with their lawyer, who informs them they need $40,000 by Thursday to pay off the bank, or it will foreclose on Friday. He supports their plan of robbing Texas Midland branches and using the stolen money to pay back the bank, pointing out that the bank kept their mother in poverty to seize the land cheaply. He also advises them to use Texas Midland to manage the trust. Marcus and Alberto continue their stakeout of the bank branch. Alberto remarks that the Comanche once owned all the land in West Texas before the white settlers took it by force, and now their descendants are losing it to the banks. He heads into a nearby hotel while Marcus stays outside, keeping an eye on the bank. Meanwhile, the brothers prepare for their final heist. The first bank they target is permanently closed, catching them off guard. They decide to head to the next bank, but Tanner insists they go to the town of Post for a bigger bank. Toby reluctantly agrees, leaving their car on the outskirts of town. Marcus and Alberto discuss the situation over a map, identifying 7 Texas Midland branches. The one in Fort Worth is too big, 2 have already been hit, 1 is closed, and they are watching another. This leaves the bank in Post as the brothers' final target. They head to Post as Tanner and Toby arrive at the crowded bank. Tanner starts collecting money while Toby watches the crowd. A customer texts someone about the robbery, and soon, a customer and a guard draw their guns and start shooting. Tanner kills them both and gets Toby outside, where an armed mob awaits. They manage to reach their truck, but the mob gives chase. Toby is wounded, but it's only a flesh wound. Tanner drives them out of town, grabs an M16, and fires at the mob, forcing them to retreat. He gets Toby to his car and instructs him to take the money to the Indian casino in Oklahoma. Toby asks about Tanner's plans, and Tanner implies this is his end. They say their goodbyes. Marcus and Alberto hear about the robbery and join several state troopers in pursuing Tanner. Tanner positions himself on a hill and fends off the police with a deer rifle. In the ensuing firefight, Alberto is shot in the head, leaving Marcus visibly shaken. The mob of townspeople arrives, and Marcus informs them of the situation, seeking their cooperation. One of the townsmen offers to help Marcus get into a position to take down Tanner. Marcus accepts and uses the man's rifle to fatally shoot Tanner. Meanwhile, Toby encounters a police roadblock, but cleverly conceals his gunshot wound and passes through without raising suspicion. He heads to an Indian casino and watches the news, visibly saddened by the report of his brother's fate. Toby then visits the Texas Midland Bank to settle the debt on the family ranch. The bank manager promises to fax the necessary documents to Toby's lawyer, but Toby insists he do it immediately in his presence to ensure everything is properly handled. Before leaving, Toby inquires about the bank's trust management services. Back at the Texas Ranger's office, Marcus has retired but is still greeted warmly by his former colleagues. One of the rangers informs him that the case is effectively closed. They discover Tanner's criminal history, including killing his father as a juvenile and his subsequent bank robbery spree that landed him in prison. When Marcus asks about Toby, he learns that no witnesses identified him, his record is spotless, and no one, including Texas Midland managing his trust, wants to pursue him. With oil being pumped from his ranch, Toby now earns more monthly than he ever stole. Marcus is advised to drop the case and reminded of his retirement, but he can't let it go and decides to visit Toby. At Toby's ranch, Marcus is confronted by Toby with a rifle but is allowed to sit down and is offered a beer. Marcus accuses Toby of robbing the banks and explains that Tanner did it for the thrill. He notes that Toby hasn't spent any of the oil money and demands to know why he did it, holding him accountable for the death's cost. Toby explains that his family lived in poverty for generations, and he wanted to break the cycle for his children's sake. Toby confronts Marcus, who is also armed, creating a tense standoff. However, before either can make a move, Toby's ex-wife and children arrive. Quickly, Toby explains the rifle in his hands as a precaution against wild hogs damaging the garden and introduces Marcus as an old friend. He clarifies that while he doesn't live in the house, it's his children's home. He visits often to be part of their lives and to help with repairs. Toby suggests they continue their conversation in town, but Marcus responds that while he will meet him, it won't resolve everything. He believes they will both be haunted by the events that transpired. The film ends with scenes of the ranch, highlighting the oil pumps working tirelessly. So the moral of the story is if you're going to rob banks to save your family ranch, make sure you bury your getaway car properly, avoid wild hogs, and never underestimate the importance of a well-placed oil pump.